Welcome back to Southeastern 16. I'm Chris Lee, joined by Chase Robinson. We continue our preview of SEC teams for the college football season. Today we get to the Ole Miss Rebels and a team that I knew was going to be really good. But my goodness, Chase, the more I dug into their roster, what they did in the portal, where they added depth, which is very underrated, I am very excited to see what Ole Miss can do this year. This is a super, super talented, fun, and interesting team that Lane Kiffin has assembled in Oxford.
It has. They call him the Portal King, or he calls himself the Portal King, and he did a great job in the portal this year. As we'll dive into the roster, I think this is the year Ole Miss wants to make a run. This will be it. Before we dive into the Rebels, let's talk about BetOnline. They are the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you can receive a 50% free bet of up to $250 on your first deposit to bet on anything from the Olympics to baseball to Formula One racing. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head over to the online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, unwind with one of the over 150 slots games. Head over to the website today to get in on the action. Use promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. BetOnline, the game starts here.
Chase, where I start with this team, if you were just to pick, say, and I'm making this, it's obviously we fenced off this discussion and it's biased, but like if you're going to say, let's take a quarterback, a receiving room, and a tight end room, is there anybody in this league you'd rather have than Jaxson Dart and the guys he's got to throw to?
I
More
don't
to
think
football
so.
than that, but I'm just thinking about it in those terms. You got three wide receivers in Harris, Watkins, and Wells, who are getting some preseason All-SEC love. Harrison getting some All-American love. Prieskhorn is on a lot of All-American lists as a tight end. I don't know that anybody's got better dudes to throw to, and they got some depth too. It's a little bit untested, but I really like where they started with that.
I do too. I mean, you're right. And I feel like when we read all these magazines, when we look at the, first team, second team, third team, all SEC preseason, you can't put, 5-6 players from one team on there, but I think they could have with Ole Miss. That's just what we're dealing with here. And so, yeah, this is, and they've played together. I think that's what really helps. So a lot of these guys, they've been together. They've played together. Jaxson Dart, this will be his third year starting. Lane Kiffin has never had a third year starting quarterback. Bentley back at running back. Trey Harris, Jordan Watkins, they're back. Juice Wells has transferred in. He'll fit in nicely. Prieskhorn has been on the roster as well at Ole Miss. So, I mean, just the skill guys along with Jaxson Dart, them having played together, that just makes this so much more interesting. And then the addition of Juice Wells, who is fantastic, as we'll look at the wide receiver room more. But, yeah, just the sheer fact that they've played a lot of snaps together, I think, is one thing. But then the sheer amount of talent that they have is another, and that combination is going to be very dangerous this year.
Yeah, what else I like about them too is I don't know how Lane Kiffin does this, okay? Like, and you've seen him do it in the quarterback room. He brought in Walker Howard, who was an LSU legacy. We don't have a place for you to play. In fact, the quarterback room was even more crowded last year. He threw, 4 passes all year, stuck around, and then they went and did it with offensive line, right? Because they've got a bunch of guys returning. They got Jaden Williams. Eli Ackers played a lot as reserve inside. Caleb Warren's made like 19 career starts. Jeremy James started all games last year for them. Micah Pettis started 9 games. I'm looking at that if I'm a transfer and I'm going, okay, wait a minute. They got a lot of guys. If they want me as an offensive line transfer, it looks like a crowded room, and you would think that they would want to lean on their own guys because they're used to playing together. Well, they got not just one, but they got 4 dudes who played, 3 guys who played Power 5 ball last year, and 1 guy, Jaquan Scott, who started 42 games at Southern Miss. 4 offensive line transfers, including 2 from Washington, plus Diego Pounds from North Carolina, who all came in. And all those guys may start the year, other than maybe Nate Kalapo, is a backup. That's just amazing. An amazing sell job that Lane Kiffin did there. And I think their offensive line depth in terms of guys that have proven it maybe as good as anybody's in this league.
Yeah, it is. And we have on another video on our SEC Football Hour show, we ranked offensive lines, and we both had Ole Miss pretty high because of what they've gathered here. And this is you're right. I mean, it's amazing what Lane Kiffin does in the portal. And it's not just let's bring in a bunch of guys. I've said this about other teams. No, they went out and got quality guys for these positions. They got quite a bit of guys out of the portal, but they're all good players. They're all quality players. And it's not just let's add numbers. No, it's let's add depth. And they've done that. And this is a deep offensive line. And to have the skill guys, to have the quarterback they do, and a good offensive line, whew, there's going to be some big numbers out of the Ole Miss Rebels this year.
Well, let's talk defense too. I don't think anybody did more in the portal on the defensive line than they did. They brought in Princely Umanmielen. I'm going to hope that's right. God help me trying to pronounce that one. The kid who's been at Florida for a while, Walter Nolen, who everybody knows, potential first-round pick. They got a couple of returning potential All-SEC guys in JJ Pegues and Jared Ivey. That is going to be, I think, when we start ranking defensive lines, I would be shocked if Ole Miss is not on this list. And that's been a thing that's been missing from this. They've had the pieces offensively, but it's can they compete with the big boys on defense? That was a really phenomenal start.
Yeah, it was. And, last year is when Lane Kiffin brought over Pete Golding from Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
And the year before, the Rebels, they were all right at defense. They allowed 25.5 points per game. Last year, that lowered to 22, just over 22 points per game. And I think that's going to lower this year just because of what they have done on defense, of bringing so many good guys in. And you mentioned this defensive front, and it is, again, if you could list out on this first team, second team, third team, all SEC, a lot of these guys could be first team all SEC. That's what we're dealing with here on the defensive side as well. And so, we talk about how this roster is made up to go to make a deep run. Yes, they definitely are on offense, but I think it's almost the same on defense because it all starts up front, and they've played a lot of football. These guys on the front of this defense have, and they've played a lot of tough football. But I think they're going to play really well together. Even the guys who've transferred in, like they see the goal in mind, and that's what excites me about Ole Miss this year. Just again, as we look at this roster, as we dive deeper into this is a really good defense, and this is they're going to turn some heads. This defense is this year.
Chase, they've got 8 guys on this defense that I have seen mentioned somewhere as potential all SEC guys. Now that might be Phil Steele's 4th team or Athlon's 4th team or whatever. But if you're a top quarter at your position in this league, you're probably a pretty good player. And they got 2 corners in Isaiah Hamilton and Trey Amos, the Alabama transfer, who've been getting some love. They've got John Saunders back, who was very productive for them a year ago at safety. And then they added with some pieces. Key Lawrence from Oklahoma was a key guy that secondary last year. Yam Banks from South Alabama. Another guy who's been a really productive player, had 3 interceptions last year. They got Brandon Turnage, who's played at Tennessee and Alabama again. Oh, and Chris Paul from Arkansas at middle linebacker. Again, I'm just amazed that not only did they add the stuff they needed, but his ability to convince guys to come in and say, all right, you might be second team behind some established guys, but can I sell you on Ole Miss? And his ability to do that to me was just, again, something you saw him do on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and one thing that I think we should, talking very high of Ole Miss's defense, I think is the right thing to do. I'm interested to see how they play together, how they gel. This is a lot of guys from a lot of different teams who have been learning a lot of different vernacular and everything else, and now they're all on one team, and so I'm interested to see if it takes time for them to kind of gel and get on the same page, and as far as communication goes on defense, just because, again, there's so many new faces from so many different places. Maybe that's something to watch and keep an eye on. But The corners, Trey Amos from Alabama, Isaiah Hamilton at Houston, two really good players. I think they're going to be great on the corners for Ole Miss. We talk a lot about offense in the SEC. There's going to be some really high-powered offenses, and I think this defense is designed really good to stop those high-powered offenses, and I think they're going to do well at that this year, even with all these different pieces. Even if it does take a few games to gel, I think they're ready for that.
Yeah, if you want to pick nits, I don't know that they're outstanding on special teams, but they're not bad. Davis has been an okay field goal kicker for him before. Frazier Martin just kind of probably a below average SEC punter, but Jordan Watkins is going to be one of the better return guys. And we completely glossed over this, Chase, that running back room. They got Henry Parrish back from Miami. Of course, we know who they lost, but they got Logan Diggs in from LSU, who I think was LSU's leading rusher a year ago, played at Notre Dame 2 years ago. They got Lucius Bentley, who's been there 3 years. They got a lot of guys. It's kind of the old Georgia style approach under Kirby Smart, where you give a bunch of guys the ball and you got a bunch of guys at the end of the year with 600 yards rushing and everybody's fresh. That feels like what they've tried to do there.
Yeah, I think they have, and I think that's a really good approach to take. To have a deep room, utilize that deep room. We've talked about their deep at wide receiver. They're going to be throwing the ball a lot with Jaxson Dart, but they also can run the ball very dangerously as well because of those guys you just mentioned. I like Bentley. I think he's been mentioned for all SEC honors. I like Parrish and Diggs. Those are great additions. So any number of guy can touch the ball, and you may not have like that one back that has the big yards because they can spread it out. And I think that's really good. Keep fresh legs in there. And in the times you need to run it down somebody, you can, because that's what kind of room you have. So, it's a great running back room and special teams as well. I think back to Caden Davis. He hit that 56-yarder at Tulane last year, which was a huge moment for Ole Miss. And so, I think they're good on special teams as well.
Yeah, Chase, can't wait to see these guys play. The schedule really gets interesting starting that October 12th night game at LSU. Then they got Oklahoma after that, Georgia 2 weeks after that. That's when really it's going to matter for the Rebels. Those are the games they've got to win. Not all of them. I don't think anybody expects them to. Nobody's saying, hey, go play Georgia and you lose that one, you don't get the playoffs. But that LSU-Oklahoma stretch right there is going to be really key.
It is, and I think that LSU game is monumental for them to be able to go down to Baton Rouge and win that game. I think will be huge because you think back, Lane Kiffin has not had that big monumental win at Ole Miss. He has had some really good wins. Mm-hmm. He has had some great moments, but he hasn't had that. Oh, that is a monumental win by Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss. He can do that this year, whether it's a game in the season to get them to the playoff, whether it's a playoff game. I think it's set up for him to win that big game this year, and I think that will help him a lot. But the schedule that LSU, Oklahoma, at LSU, and then Oklahoma are going to be two really huge games. And then you think back to last year, they got dominated by Georgia. And, they remember that, even with all these new guys, they remember that. And so I think that game could look much different. It's in Oxford, Mississippi this year, and they're going to have that on their mind when they play on November the 9th. So, I mean, they won 11 games last year. Best Ole Miss has ever done. Lane Kiffin has got this program right where they need to be. But this is the year. You talk about, sometimes there's 1 year for a team that this is their time to do it all. And this is that for Ole Miss. Now, will this be the norm? Will he be able to get this much talent out of the portal in years to come? I think we'll just have to wait and see. But we know what this roster is. I think Jaxson Dart could have a special year. And if he does have a special year, we're going to be talking about Ole Miss in the month of January because they're still going to be playing football. That's what kind of team this is. And Lane Kiffin has never had a third-year starting quarterback, like I mentioned earlier in this video. So I think this is set up to be a prime time year for the Ole Miss Rebels and Lane Kiffin. And so, I mean, this is a deep roster, and I think he's done a good job of putting this together. So, yeah, call him the Portal King, whatever, but he has done a great job of assembling a championship type roster for 2024, and that's what this is, a championship type roster.
Chase, you mentioned one thing that's worth talking about. That Ole Miss has kind of always been that team trying to get in there, right? I mean, you mentioned winning big games. I'm thinking maybe the biggest game he's won, and one of the ones that comes to mind was the famous Mustard game in Knoxville. What of
Yeah.
2021, I think it was. But you remember the get your popcorn game? We know how that went. Games on that type stage, he's not done well, but he hasn't had that type of talent either. There's one thing that's going to be an interesting dynamic, and that's the fact that this is going to be the first time that Ole Miss has kind of been that team with the target on its back, rather than kind of playing from the back of the pack and looking ahead a little bit. It's going to be interesting to see how they handle that.
Yeah, and that's the case for a couple SEC teams this year who I think Missouri being another one where they're kind of ahead of everybody. Ole Miss is ahead of a lot of people now. They're not having to play from behind, and going back to the big game thing, I think you think about that, the get your popcorn ready game and all the hype going into that one. Last year, Lane Kiffin had a chance to beat Alabama, and I think he should have beaten Alabama last year, but he didn't. And again, that was one of those games that I was sitting there watching. I was like, this could be a kind of a legacy game for Lane Kiffin. He wins this one. This is the biggest game he's ever won in his career, and he couldn't get it done. So I'm still waiting for that big game, and I think this is the year. I think you have a couple big wins this year, one of those big legacy monumental wins. But because I feel like he's set himself up for that with this roster.
Yeah, I do too. Well, we'll be here to cover it. It'll be an exciting season. We cover SEC football, baseball, and basketball here at Southeastern 16. Best way to find it all, hit that subscribe button. It is free. It's like a like, so please do that. Tell a friend. And if you're interested in advertising, caroline.smith@southeastern14.com. Yes, we know we've changed the name. That email will still get there, but we got an audience in the millions every year. So if you're looking to reach an SEC football audience, we got you covered there. All right, I'm Chris Lee for Chase Robinson. Thanks for watching us here at Southeastern 16, presented by BetOnline.